All right, so before I begin this presentation, I'd like to, give a trigger warning for, any students, for, the students. I want to make sure that you guys are, comfortable and, with the content of this presentation. Um, this presentation, I show images of torture. I discuss human rights violations, such as torture, and I also show images of violent protests and also images of war footage. So if any of these things may trigger a reaction in you, you can meet with me after class, or you can meet with me during my class hours, and we can discuss an alternative lesson plan that doesn't involve this lecture. So this is part of our human rights unit, this lecture, and we're going to be talking about today the war in Donbas. Now, um, the war. So the war in Donbas, if you don't know what it is already, it's a war in the Donbas region of Ukraine between Ukrainian forces, the Ukrainian army, and pro-Russian rebel groups who want to seek the unity of the Donbas region with Russia. So, I'm going to give some information about what the Donbas region is. It's officially known as the Donetsk Basin region, but in Ukraine, people just call it Donbas, and it's a relatively important industrial and mining region in Ukraine. Now, it wasn't always a conflict hotspot. It was very peaceful. There wasn't really any armed conflict in the region, but this all changed during the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution. And I'm going to show you a scene from the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution during the height of the protests. So, as you can see, these are very violent protests. The people are out on the streets and they're angry. So, I'm going to give some context for that. Now, the revolution in Ukraine was spurred by it kind of originated in the Euromaidan movement in Ukraine. Now, the Euromaidan movement in Ukraine started after the president at the time, Viktor Yanukovych, rejected a referendum for Ukraine to join the EU, and that made a lot of Ukrainians very, very angry. They wanted a lot of them wanted a union with the EU, and they thought they accused Yanukovych's government of being very corrupt and seeking close ties with Russia, which many Ukrainians didn't want, and they had good reason for the corruption accusations. According to Transparency International, Viktor Yanukovych's presidency was the top example of corruption in the world at the time. So, eventually the protests worked; they were successful. Yanukovych was ousted, and this is why it's called the revolution. And a more pro European Union president was installed following Yanukovych's ousting. But this didn't really solve all the problems in Ukraine, and it started the chaos of the protests was one of the things that started the war in Donbas. So they took advantage of the unrest in Ukraine, the general atmosphere of chaos during the protests. These two pro-Russian rebel movements emerged. They sought unity with Russia. And these two movements were the Donetsk People's Republic, and the Donetsk People's Republic was located in the Donetsk Oblast of Ukraine. And so you can think of an oblast, if you don't know what that is. It's Ukraine. In Ukraine, an oblast is like a state, kind of. It's like a state or like a province, kind of, is the best way to describe it. And another example. And I mean, the second rebel movement was the Luhansk People's Republic, and it was located in the Luhansk region, the Luhansk Oblast, of Ukraine. And so these two rebel movements, rapidly began to expand and control large swaths of territory in the Donbas region. So, and the Ukrainian government saw this and were like, they were kind of alarmed by the rapid spread of the rebel movements. And so the Ukrainian government launched an anti-terrorist operation against the rapidly expanding rebel groups. Now it's now known as the Joint Forces Operation. But this is the start of the conflict: the Ukrainians versus the rebels in Donbas. So I'd like to show you this primary source, this photo from the conflict. And so this is an area of the Donbas region that is controlled by the Donetsk People's Republic. It's controlled by the DPR. And so while you can see right here, if you follow my pointer, you can see that's the flag of the Donetsk People's Republic. But one of the things I really wanted to call attention to in this photo was the lettering here. And if you look at it, it says, if you follow my pointer, it says "Hands off Ukraine, US and EU." So this kind of shows how the DPR and the LPR, they're kind of grounded in the response to the Euromaidan movement. They were the opposition. They were the people who were in favor of Yanukovych seeking closer ties with Russia. They thought the EU was was just foreign powers getting their hands into Ukraine, right? So I just wanted to show you this is kind of their mission. They perceive the US and EU as just a Western threat, trying to get their hands into Ukraine and trying to control them. And so hence the reason for their separation and their attempts to unify with Russia. All right. So one of the things I'd like to talk about is very important is the Russian involvement in the war in Donbas. So this isn't really a surprise because Russia stands to gain from the war, from the pro-Russian rebels in the war in Donbas. It's just more territory for Russia. And that that it's just more territory for them. But they've kind of to avoid international criticism, they've kind of been very dodgy about their involvement in it. They try to kind of hide their involvement and make it not very outright obvious that they're involved in this, right? So they initially said that when they were moving troops across the border, they were moving they initially said they were moving humanitarian aid convoys, humanitarian aid in parentheses, across the Donbas border into Ukraine. They said they were just trying to send aid to help people who were needed it during the conflict. But drone footage showed image to the contrary. It showed the drone footage showed that they were carrying things such as the supposed humanitarian aid convoys were carrying things such as anti-air guns, artillery and armor personnel carriers. And they're carrying things such as they're secretly sending in the guise of the humanitarian aid convoys, they're sending military hardware, ammunition, and manpower for troop rotation. So this is how they're getting involved. They're secretly doing it. They're not out. But the surprising thing is Russia's actually outright admitted to deploying soldiers in the region pretty recently. From this year, I'm quoting right here Putin's actual words. He said, "We were forced. I want to stress, forced to defend the Russian-speaking population in the Donbas region," and that was his claim for why he sent soldiers over. This is his claim for why he sent soldiers over to defend, not to defend, but he sent soldiers over to participate in the war in Donbas. He said it was to protect the Russian-speaking population, and he's using this as an excuse to aid the DPR and aid the LPR. And I'm going to discuss why this is problematic, why the Russia's involvement in this war is problematic. Despite the fact that they're helping an armed rebel group who is trying to separate from a foreign country. There's another issue to this, and I will discuss that after the next slide. So I wanted to show you war footage of, the war so that you can really understand what's happening and, the fact that people are living in a war zone in Donbas. So as you can So, I just wanted to demonstrate this to you to show you like that it's really important to look at to put a war into perspective. And I want you to have a firsthand perspective of the war to see what it looks like. This isn't just some low-level conflict. As you saw, this is a real war. A lot of people don't really acknowledge the war in Donbass. A lot of people don't really understand it. And I wanted to show you that footage to show you like that there is a real live war going on in that region and that it has real consequences for the people living there. And I'll discuss this in this next slide.